Hey, MCARBO brother here. Let's talk about our Marlin rifles, the Marlin 60 and the Marlin 795. Now we got a Marlin 795 in front of us here, so we're going to talk about this trigger spring kit. You're getting over 2 pounds in trigger reduction. A lot of you have had a fantastic success with this trigger spring kit. Now this is a great trigger job for your firearm, but it's just not complete without a comparable trigger. Well, now we've got it. The Marlin 60, Marlin 795 target trigger for your Marlin rifles. It's a great companion upgrade to your trigger spring kit. So you're going to get a lighter, smoother trigger pull, and you're going to have an excellent target trigger that doesn't have serrated lines on it, that's got pre-travel adjustment. It's made out of 6061 aircraft grade aluminum. I mean, this is an ideal trigger. This is what you want for your firearm. Unlike the stock factory trigger that's pot metal and it's just got a cheap, nickel plated coating. It's just not built to last. This trigger is built to last. And I know you guys, a lot of you have had your Marlin 60s forever. And it's something that you want to pass down to your kids and you want to keep in the family forever. I get it. So let's put a good trigger on there. And let's also make sure we're doing the trigger spring kit simultaneously. It makes sense, and it's just the best way to do it. If you're going to do one, why not do the other? I mean, it's night and day difference once you put both items in. But if you want to put one at a time and see how it goes, go right ahead. So let's just take a quick side by side. We've got the target trigger here, and then let's look real quick at the factory trigger. You can see all those serrated lines there. It goes all the way up, which isn't necessary. And then you've got this pre-travel. You got this slack here. I mean, with the target trigger by MCARBO, you're going to be able to get rid of that. A lighter, smoother, more complete trigger pull, and a more complete offering by MCARBO. The Marlin 60, Marlin 795 target trigger, and the Marlin 795 trigger spring kit. And there's also a Marlin 60 trigger spring kit for you Marlin 60 guys. Happy to introduce the Marlin 60, Marlin 795 target trigger by MCARBO. Parts and tools needed for this build: Marlin 60, Marlin 795 target trigger by MCARBO, a 9/64 Allen wrench, a small punch, a large punch, a block of wood, and a hammer. Before we go any further, let's make sure our firearm's clear. We'll do this together. Place the weapon on safe, remove source ammunition, go ahead and charge the bolt back, lock it to the rear, check the chamber, make sure there's nothing in the chamber, check the bolt face, make sure there's nothing hanging out there, then check the magazine well, make sure there's no source ammunition. All three positions are clear, this firearm's clear. First thing we're going to do is remove the trigger guard from the stock. Take your 9/64 Allen wrench and remove these two screws here. This one here will be one of the longer screws, just remember that's in the back. Now the forward screw, this is the shorter one. Now keep a good grip with your other hand on the stock and the barrel, keeping them together. You're going to have to pull up on the back of the trigger guard, like so. Be careful, it is plastic. You're going to have to manipulate it around the bolt release and the magazine release. So just push forward on the magazine release and kind of pull backward on that trigger guard, and it'll come right out like so. Go ahead and set the rest of your firearm to the side, and let's focus on the trigger guard. So as you see, we're going to get rid of this pot metal serrated trigger, replace it with a nice smooth blade target trigger. All we have to really do is knock out these two pins. Now, if there's something specific, the pins, they only go one way, so you'll notice that there's a deformed end on your pins. The best way to tell where they are in your trigger assembly is to just slightly tap on one side and see, on the other side if it comes out the serrated edge. So as you can see here, this rear pin, you can see that deformed end if you look close enough to on your pins. So we're going to place that deformed end down, and we're going to tap out that rear pin first. It helps if you have a hole in a block of wood like this, giving the pin somewhere to go. So we're using our small punch, and we're just going to punch that rear pin out. That was easy. Just came out like butter. Alright, so the next one, we're just going to go with the forward pin now and do the same. It's likely, and very likely, since it just fell right out, that the deformed ends will be on both sides. But like I said earlier, you can always just tap out partially one end of the pin and see if it's deformed or not, and make sure. So we'll go ahead and we'll pull out. So this trigger return spring will generally just fall out, but in this case you just kind of pull it right out, pull the trigger right out. And let's do a quick side-by-side comparison of these triggers. You've got the MCARBO target trigger, and you've got the pot metal factory trigger. You see how it's got all those serrated edges on it there. Really uncomfortable trigger, and the target trigger is nice and smooth and really easy to find that sweet spot. And you've also got your pre-travel adjustment up here, which we're going to talk quite a bit about because there is something to be concerned with if you over adjust it. Now let's adjust the pre-travel on our target trigger. You're going to need a 1/16 Allen key, so go ahead and insert that into the screw. And you're just going to turn it to the right clockwise. And what we're looking at here is counting the threads. You can either count on the top or the bottom of that screw, but we're counting the threads. So there's 1, 2, 3. You see that? See those 3 threads? That's the maximum we're ever going to go on this adjustment. And I'm going to tell you why. If you go too far with this adjustment, too far out this direction, this trigger will fire on safe. It'll render the safety useless. So it's very, very important that you never go too far with this pre-travel adjustment. You can adjust it so much so that you're actually rendering the safety useless. So we don't ever want that. We want a firearm that functions properly, so we're never going to go more than this. You can even back it off just a little bit to be safe, but what we're ultimately going to do is we're going to test it once it gets in there. And it's easy to adjust. You know, once we put the trigger guard back in the firearm and say it does fire on safe, we're going to just pull the trigger guard out and we're going to adjust it real quick. So nothing to be too concerned about, but you need to be aware that if you over adjust it, you're rendering your safety useless. Alright, let's move forward with the rest of the installation. So we're going to go ahead and we're just going to slide the trigger right in, like so. We're going to grab the rear pin, which is a small thin one. You see the deformed end there on this side? We're actually going to make sure that's facing up. And we're going to push the smooth end in first. And it'll actually just go in there real easily. If it doesn't, you'll take your larger punch and set it on there and then tap it in. Then grab your second pin, the larger one, and once again the deformed end will be facing up. You can see the deformed end there. Alright, that's facing up. And then your trigger return spring, we're going to place it in like that. So flip this over, place the trigger return spring in like so. We're going to line up the holes with the trigger guard, with the trigger return spring and the trigger. Make sure the deformed end is facing up. So we're going to place it in like so. And we're going to work it in there. This is where you're going to have to kind of just push on the trigger return spring, get that lined up and in there first. And then you may have to wiggle the trigger forward, backward a little, get it lined up, and it'll just go in there real easily. And then take your larger punch and just set it on there and give it maybe a couple little taps until it's flush. Okay, and now we're just going to go ahead and just check the function real quick. Now this isn't the final function test, we're just doing a quick. Okay, so that's what we want. Before we insert the trigger guard and test it, I just want to point out that this is the disconnector here, and that your pre-travel adjustment screw, this is where it will actually touch, so it'll touch the disconnector. So it bridges the gap between the trigger and the disconnector. That's why if we go too far, it'll render the safety useless. So it's really critical that we now install the trigger guard with the pre-travel adjustment in place, no more than 3 threads extended. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and insert the trigger guard, and the idea is to go forward. So we'll loop it around that bolt release, we're going to get it past the magazine release, and we're going to kind of make sure it's in place on the front first. Okay, so you heard it kind of just pop into place there. Everything's ready here. Now we're going to go ahead and just push it down in the back. So this is where we're going to do our testing. So now we're going to actually test this trigger and make sure that it doesn't fire on safe. Go ahead and grab a snap cap, your magazine, or you can use a spent casing. You're going to load it in there and you're just kind of holding it all together right now, unless you want to put the screws all the way back in and test it and then remove it if necessary. So make sure the weapon's on safe, okay? And you're going to pull the trigger and it doesn't fire. Perfect. That's what we want, okay? And now place it on fire. Excellent. And there's really no pre-travel there, but that's not what we're looking for right now. We just want to make sure that it doesn't fire on safe. So If you've done that and it passed that check, then you're good. If it fired unsafe, you need to make an adjustment on your pre-travel. So that screw needs to come back out more. You don't want it to be any more than 3 threads forward there. So now that our firearm passed that initial pre-travel function check, we're going to go ahead and reinsert the bolts into the trigger guard. So the longer one goes in the back. Go ahead and get that in there. The shorter one goes in the front. Go ahead and get that in there. Get them started a little bit. Then we'll take our 9/64 Allen wrench. Go ahead and start with the back. Just make sure they're snug, no need to over tighten them. Wow, look at this side-by-side after comparison. This is what we had before, and now look what we got. I mean, it's a night and day difference, just looks and aesthetics from that standpoint. I mean, and also the feel. I mean, it's a nice, smooth, wide trigger rather than what we had before, this sort of narrow, serrated trigger with a hump in the middle, and it's just coated in some dull coating. This is a machined aluminum trigger. This is a pot metal trigger. I mean, it's a night and day difference. Amazing. Now let's insert a snap cap, see how this trigger really feels. Okay, not much play at all. Awesome. That smooth blade, I mean, that's what we want. That is perfect. All right, ideal. Perfect. So you can go from this to this. That's amazing. We're really happy to introduce the Marlin 60, Marlin 795 target trigger upgrade. Thanks for watching, guys, and as always, happy shooting.